Hello, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and I want to thank all of our moderators, expert guests, and solution sponsors for participating in these Inside Jam panel discussions. This has been a big year of changes with the launch of the all-new, always-on InsideJam.com community site. For the past 4 years, everyone here at Solutions Review has been leaning in to build the Inside Jam into a celebration of enterprise technology, with best practices, expert analysis, and solution showcases. And we want all of you to join us there to keep the jam going into the new year and beyond. If you haven't joined Inside Jam, please do. And if you already have, take a moment to invite some of your colleagues. And again, thank you all for being here and enjoy today's discussion.
Solutions Review presents Inside Jam, a social media community for enterprise technology. Hello and welcome to the 5th annual Inside Jam. My name is Jonathan Paula, and I'm not only the Director of Multimedia and Events here at Solutions Review, I'll also be serving as your MC for the next 18 panel discussions we're hosting all week long across the Solutions Review YouTube and LinkedIn channels. But if you'd like to continue the conversation and dive even more into expert insight, we encourage you to visit our new community site, InsideJam.com, an always-on destination for all of your technology needs and research. We encourage everyone to check it out. The link will be in the description of every one of these panels this week. But speaking of discussions, today's focus is on information security. Specifically, we kick off 4 hours of coverage with cybersecurity and the AI executive order with this esteemed group of panelists that we have assembled from across the globe. Dwayne, Brian, Dee, Josh, Lewis, and Mike, thank you for joining me. It is a pleasure to have all of you here with me today. Dwayne, you've graciously agreed to moderate, so we'll let you kick off the introductions. 30 seconds or less. Tell us a bit about yourself, what brings you to this discussion, and what the audience might want to get out of today's chat. And then from there, we'll go clockwise to Brian, Dee, Mike, Lewis, and Josh. Gentlemen, I will see you at the end of the show for some final thoughts and wrap up. But until then, take it away and good luck.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm excited to be here. So I'm Dwayne McDaniel. I am a developer advocate, security developer advocate at GitGuardian. We are a code security platform primarily focused on finding where hard-coded credentials live throughout code and throughout other places and help people fix that problem, give you the platform and the tools to remediate that situation and improve your overall security. And I'm super excited because I am fascinated by all things AI, and I've seen how executive orders and legislation have really driven other aspects of cybersecurity, such as with that other executive order that gave us S-bombs, among other things.
Thanks, Dwayne. My name is Brian Satyanathan. I'm a co-founder and chief technology officer of a company called Iterate.ai. We provide a AI platform for large enterprises. We are deployed at scale across a lot of companies. We enable you to do the whole 9 yards of AI, from all the way from data to computer vision to generative AI, large language models, and we also released LLMs recently to help developers, right? So what's interesting for me in this scenario is, as you know, legislation is always sort of catching up to the advances in AI, and in fact, from 2018 till now, I think this whole generative AI space have grown 3,000x, right? So it's going to be really interesting. We need some legislation, which is kind of a great step, but I wanted to hear more from the other experts as well and learn more.
Thank you. I'm Darian Degampiche. I go by D, very simply. I'm one of the founders of Protect AI. We are a company focused on security of AI-powered applications and ML systems that produce them, create them. I'm really excited to talk about, what I think is the dawning of regulations on AI applications and machine learning technologies. So I'm excited to be here, and you can learn more at protectai.com.
Josh Davis. I'm currently technical product marketing manager for Fortra, who are a really large umbrella company for many household names of security companies. But my background is really as a security analyst, working in incident response and threat hunting. And even before that, I was training and studying to move into a legal profession. So when cybersecurity meets legislation, often I get the call. I think this one is really interesting because I'm always focused on new and emerging threats, new and expanding attack surface. And this is certainly one of the biggest developments in attack surface that we're seeing as people race to adopt AI.
Hey, so I took the road that our previous panelists didn't go down, which is that I'm a developer who then actually went to law school and became a lawyer. And then I founded Tidelift, which is a company devoted to helping open source developers and open source using enterprises, which is to say all of them, meet in the middle and help improve, among other things, their security. So I'm really interested in this space of how open source and machine learning are going to inevitably come together. We're already seeing that, and how that interacts with security is going to be really interesting.
My name is Mike Pedrick. I'm VP of Cybersecurity Consulting for Newspire, and a managed security services and consulting organization based in Michigan. Myself and my team, we provide at fractional and virtual leadership, advisory, and CISO services for organizations in multiple industries. I'm also a bit of a privacy nut, data privacy, consumer data privacy. And in addition to my role at Newspire, I'm a chapter board member, trainer, and member of ISACA. I teach their auditor program, their security management program, and their risk management program multiple times through the year. Just a glutton for punishment.
Well, definitely privacy is part of what this executive order is covering. So for those of you just joining the conversation, aren't familiar and haven't read the order itself, we're talking about Executive Order 14110, entitled Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence. That title is already lengthy, but this is one of the lengthiest executive orders of all time. It's got 6 overarching goals according to the summary. If you just go find that on the White House website, protect Americans from the potential risks of AI systems, to better protect Americans' privacy, advancing equity and civil rights, standing up for consumers, patients, and students, supporting workers, and promoting innovation and competition. This is a very high-level order. It's very broad. It's got 11 different dates, from 30 to 60 to even 360 to 540 days from the date of the order. It involves over 30 secretaries or national director levels, which are individually named and mandated in the document, with like 85 specific things that need to happen. Wow, this is a lot. So all of us here have one thing in common in our backgrounds, and that is cybersecurity. And so just to kick it off, cybersecurity is used about 11 times specifically throughout this document, but the whole thing points to, better privacy and better security overall when it comes to AI. So Brian, looks like you have something to say on this. What do you think this order will mean for cybersecurity teams in the near future?
It's a great question, and I think an interesting one, right? Because this order is very broad, right? It covers so many categories and so many different groups. But I think in this entire broad swath, I think that they've tried to take the usual approach of hypothetically cybersecurity could be something that could help specifically in terms of model safety and model security and all those things. Right. I think there are a couple of things that's going to happen. I think there's a lot of it doesn't have a lot of governance and rules kind of thing. So I think the individual state groups and departments and individual procurement groups would come up, governmental groups and states would come up with their own set of legislation, right? Interpretation, a lot of these things. So as the time will reveal how it will turn into the responsibility for cybersecurity. But I think eventually governance of this would eventually fall within IT teams and cybersecurity teams within enterprises, right? Which also means a bigger challenge as well, because now you have to do a lot of upskilling for these type of groups, right? Which I think is a really interesting problem, because cybersecurity has always been a very system-oriented kind of with a lot of vendor supports and standard and governance. So now this is going to create a lot of upskilling requirements and hiring a lot of AI-specific folks within enterprise organization. So I'm sure it's definitely going to have a very interesting impact. And also it's a good time for really great, smart startups in this space to kind of rise up to the challenge, because they always solve the problem and eventually they get acquired by one of the bigger players to eventually become the standard, right? So it's definitely a really, really nice setup for startup companies, and specifically in AI security space, because AI security is not same as the traditional cybersecurity, because most of the AI security attacks would pass all the firewalls, right? Because just the nature of what is available today, right? So all the way from infrastructure players to players in the front from application have to think about it. So it's a broad space of opportunity for, I think, AI startups, right?
Mike, you're the next panelist who has cybersecurity in your title. I love the same question for you. What do you think the future holds for cybersecurity based on what we're seeing in this order?
I've been thinking about this, and initially I wanted to come in from the perspective of really this shouldn't change a whole lot from a cybersecurity perspective. But as it dawned on me, I changed my viewpoint a little bit. I work primarily in the small and medium-sized business space. These are clients that are lower on the revenue scale, lower in the size spectrum, and also very low on the maturity scale. And they're just now catching up to best practices with regard to cybersecurity. And one of my frequent laments is that because they've taken such a long time to get around to, again, adhering to best practices from a security perspective, they haven't paid any attention to data privacy. And I think that it used to be a little sliver. If you looked at, cybersecurity and data privacy, consumer data privacy as a Venn diagram, there was a little sliver between the two subjects. And now it just looks like a blurry circle. And so I'm hopeful that this, ignoring, I'm blissfully ignoring for this statement, the AI component altogether. The fact that this includes and incorporates so much from a consumer data privacy perspective, I am hopeful that cybersecurity teams, large and small, are now dragged into the present and have to pay attention to data privacy controls, not just cybersecurity controls.
Lewis, do you have
Yeah,
perspective here?
absolutely. I mean, I think I want to piggyback a little bit on what Mike said, where you're seeing blurring here of privacy and AI. You're also, I think, seeing just a continued pervasiveness of cybersecurity in everything federal government does, right? Like you don't want to see this in isolation as just the AI. Of course, everybody's going to call it the AI EO, which we'll get, we'll get our get farmers in there somewhere. But this is part of a much broader trend of government, especially in the last 3 years, maturing around security, right? And it's not just the US federal government either. The EU is working on what they call the Cyber Resilience Act, which has a lot of security implications. As somebody already mentioned SBOMs. Like this is part of a broader, it's a little bit patchwork right now, right? It's very much a quilt, but it is part of this broader move. I mean, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time red teaming has shown up in an executive order. And, that's the kind of thing that we wouldn't have expected to see 3 or 4 years ago, and didn't just come out because of this AI order. It's part of, again, successive layering and maturing of where the federal government is at on security.
I couldn't agree more. This is so broad. It's reactionary to what I think is happening very quickly on the ground. But Josh, I know you had a comment on this as well before we move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to jump on Lewis's comment about the penetration testing. So I think these top level legislative documents, whatever they may be, it's difficult to prescribe actual takeaways you can go and do in your cybersecurity strategy. And it's even more difficult to anticipate unknown threats that Brian alluded to, that we're undoubtedly going to see these novel threats within AI technologies. So penetration testing actually really stood out for me as this is a way we can mandate that you have people who are constantly checking, reviewing your cybersecurity posture, who are actually identifying and finding potentially novel but also known vulnerabilities. And then you have to share these out. They share these reports if you're part of the critical infrastructure. So if you have the same stuff come in the next report, there's a level of accountability that even if it's not strictly enforced, you're having the same things come up year by year, every single penetration test, and fingers are going to be pointed, and it's not going to be hands up, head in the sand, I didn't know.
Absolutely. As we saw with previous executive order, it's caught kind of everybody by surprise. Like, hey, now these things that we should have been producing the whole time, these software bill of materials, all of a sudden now we need to and have to. And that brings us to the regulation and what do we do? What do we as teams need to do to prepare? And Dee, I think you're in a great position to answer that, coming from a legal perspective and really focusing a lot of your attention on the AI space. What do we need to do next? How can we all be better prepared for what's about to happen?
Well, I think it starts with understanding that what does the executive order mean? Your original question was, what does it change for today? And I think that answer is very little to nothing, because it's unenforceable. It also doesn't give prescriptive guidance on things like AI red teaming or AI penetration testing. And what you should take away from the executive order is that this is the first signal that enforceable laws are coming. So what do you have to do to prepare? I think the first thing you need to do is think about understanding your AI ML system. And that begins with having a machine learning bill of materials. While it's not in there, we've referenced SBOMs and others and other legal frameworks and laws that require a software bill of materials. You need an an ML bill of materials, and a bill of materials for software, a bill of materials for data is not sufficient for that in AI. The second thing that you need to do is start thinking about, you can't have a secure AI house if you don't have a solid foundation of ML lineage. And so when you think about what you need to do from a red teaming or penetration testing perspective, we need to really redefine what that means for AI. AI red teaming is not just testing. It's really kind of understanding and attacking AI specific vulnerabilities. But you can't do that if you don't understand what's in your system. And you can't do that if you're not really sure what an AI application is or what is constituted inside of a machine learning model. So I think that really it comes down to understanding what an AI application is, having lineage and bill of materials on your ML environment, and then understanding specific techniques and specific vulnerabilities that are unique to AI applications so that you can meet the security components. And safety is a whole nother debate that I'm sure we'll get into.
Mike, I'm going to come back to you because you're very much boots on the ground,
Sure.
dealing with the very front line. What are you doing to prepare? Like, how do you think your teams and other teams like your team can be better prepared for this?
I'm very definitely a back to basics sort of cat. I'm always advising clients that, there's the shiny new stuff, the shiny new vulnerabilities to pay attention to, new compromises, novel attack vectors, et cetera. But man, I always go back to basics, right? What are we doing from an inventory perspective? What are we doing from prudent controls perspective? What do our processes look like, right? And so when I think about the notion of SBOMs and inventory and being able to report on just what exactly lives in our environment, I have to wonder if in a lot of spaces, this will have a chilling effect. Like if I have to track everything in my environment and report on it, I'm going to be inclined to have a much more narrow set of tools in my environment or farm that sort of thing out. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I could definitely plead the case for consolidation of tools and avoiding sprawl, and of course advocate for having that inventory regardless of how big or small it is. But reporting to the government what exists in my environment, again, I think there's going to be some sort of chilling effect there.
Brian, I'm going to bounce up to you. Actually, what do you think on that? Like, is someone building AI and working with this tooling firsthand? Are you already thinking, should we do this? Where are the limitations going to be? Like, how am I going to report on this? Or is it right now just still full steam ahead? Let's figure out what AI can even do.
No, great question. I think doing the biggest challenge in AI is that it's just not one thing, right? It's a very broad thing. I mean, the stuff that you want to the protection that you will have on a traditional deep learning ML model is going to be very, very different what you're going to have on a large language model compared to a image model, and because they're all very drastically different. And the attack vectors are completely different, right? So just like Dee said, you wanted to first take an inventory of what you have, going back to your best practices, and really understand, what's in there, right? And then I think like for us specifically at iterate.ai, we are building a lot of securities into our models in terms of, specifically in our training and tool sets, right? So we are enabling a lot of that stuff that we don't protect. We are also recommending our customers partner with some security companies, right? So there is definitely going to be a very large knowledge gap, specifically in the large enterprises and even governmental bodies that is trying to implement parts of it. Once the states and the individual groups put on their own agendas on top of it, there will be a lot of knowledge gaps that needs to be filled. I think that's where I think a lot of companies here will have to kind of rush into to kind of fill that knowledge gap in, because when a lot of the cybersecurity laws came in, right? I mean, like from 1995 till I don't know, till like 2001, 2004, when a lot of these things became mainstream, there was 8 to 10 years for people to kind of build a lot of tool sets. I think in AI, it's developing a lot faster, right? I mean, of course, attacks are happening, but more than that, the base tech itself is developing faster, which means, like the folks have to really understand and learn what's exactly going on within these models and these systems. And sometimes, even engineers and scientists who operate these models don't quite know what's going on, right? It doesn't mean that attacks cannot be prevented. I mean, you can still have inventories and best practices and everything, right? But so there is a lot more there is a lot more opportunities to create confusion, and there is going to be a lot bigger knowledge gap, right? That's what I think as cyber teams learn on AI. I think the first thing I would say, learn as much as possible, right? And treat all of them differently, just like how you would look at like different security attack vectors, right? Treat them differently. It's just not one AI, one ML, just depending on the systems, right? Learn as fast as possible and get the help of startups and various companies to fill your knowledge gap, right? Till your teams become up to par. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Lewis, look like you had want to jump in on that.
Two quick things. I mean, one, it's striking that we're all talking, I think, correctly about understanding what we're using. We're talking about AI bombs. There's a lot of interesting stuff there won't bore with the details here, but if you Google that, you'll already find a lot of, it's very striking that the executive order doesn't require transparency around what data goes into the ML, right? In fact, I mean, that's I think a glaring omission and a real policy problem, and one that I would say is not missing in other regulations, right? If you look at this and think, I don't need to know where the data for my ML comes from, you're making a mistake, because the EU is going to require that. Probably Congress is going to require that.
And states.
What's that? And the states, yes.
And
absolutely.
states.
Yeah, absolutely. So just because it's missing here, don't think that you can get away with just tossing whatever data you can into the blender. The other thing is, which I think is somebody who's I love reading all the new research papers, drinking from this fire hose. So I want to push back a little bit on Mike. Mike's not wrong. You got to do the basic blocking and tackling of cybersecurity. This doesn't change that, but the EO directs a lot of branches of the government to do basic fundamental research on what even is security in this area. What is bias? I think it's important on an all-male panel to call out that bias is still very much an issue in this industry, and this EO is going to drive some research in that. And I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see, as a result of this EO, we're going to see a lot of new research on what does it mean to even be secure, to do good as an ML, and you're going to have to stay on top of that. Unfortunately, if you're not prepared to stay on top of that, maybe AI security is moving too fast for you, and you should do something a little slower paced.
On top of that, that's where I think the executive order is just woefully misguided, right? It talks about security, but yet it's really about safety. It's more about public declaration. It doesn't actually talk about security. And if you were to compare it to, say, a firearm or any other dual use components, you have security of firearm and you have firearm safety. Those are two different things. And I think that the debate around the regulation of AI is kind of caught in the middle. And it's amplified by the fact that there seems to be almost a double standard in terms of, say, bias in human systems versus bias in AI systems. We can't eliminate it in one, so what makes us think we're going to eliminate it in another?
That is a really interesting segue to the next thing I was going to ask about, and that is, at least to me, it feels like this entire executive order is a reaction to the AI hype cycle that we've all been living through over the last year, where out of nowhere, ChatGPT becomes the main conversation piece, no pun intended. So Josh, you are someone who works in marketing as well. I'm a function of marketing here. And very interested in your thoughts around that. Is this something that is urgent and we need to piece together and solve right now, or is this just another part of the AI hype cycle, or maybe the ship sailed on this and it's like government can't respond fast enough?
Yeah. I see where you're coming from, and I'm certainly not a marketing expert as much. I probably lean to the other things, but I think we've dealt with in our industry people calling out AI as a way to improve their cybersecurity tooling and position it like that. AI is a really broad spectrum of what it could be. It can be tiny, just one regressive query looking backwards, or it could be something huge, like more like the Chat GPTs. But it has exploded with that. And I think this gave me the kind of warm and fuzzies of how many things it was trying to tackle. Initially, I really thought we were going to focus on security when I sat down to read this. And I appreciate the nods to all the different things, but there is a feeling of trying to boil the ocean and a lot of good sentiment without real substance to back it up behind. So I think what'll be interesting is what we see from the output of this report, right? When we've seen the different American departments that have been assigned certain tasks, what's that going to result in? Is that going to result in something that is more enforceable? Is it going to result in buy-in from a lot of other companies? That's really where I'm going to reserve my judgment to see how much they're actually able to act upon. But also, it felt like a bit of an advert for the US government as well, that we are opening shop for all AI people to come over and have got a good handle on all the different elements they could possibly think of that will need to be legislated or at least considered going forward.
Right on. I'm going to throw it back to you, Dee. The same question. Is this actually going to be useful in the long run? Or are we at a point where this is another part of the hype cycle?
I think there's two parts to it. Yes, I think it's part of the hype cycle. That's the response, right? This is an impulse response system. Is it going to be useful as written? I really don't think so, because it's unenforceable. There's not really any congressional funding. It's not even like super prescriptive on things. So is it useful? I think it's only useful as a signal. I think what's more interesting is what's happening really at the state levels, in particular industries. For example, how it's used in, insurance regulators at the state level, how it's used in finance. You see existing kind of regulatory frameworks that do have statutory components to it, in the likes of the SEC and the Department of Energy, the FDA, et cetera. So I think that what it is it's just really a signal that says, hey, this technology is going to be regulated. We are not going to just kind of allow unfettered development. And I think it's also sending a signal to regulators at lower levels, even down to municipalities, and saying, hey, I think that you can probably take some action here because it's needed. But I don't think that this specific executive order really does much. In my opinion, it's kind of a nothing burger other than just a desire to try to do something or appear to be doing something.
All right, let me push back a little bit on that. Yeah, look, for those who are not experts in the way the U.S. federal government work, an executive order is pretty limited by nature, right? It can't do a lot to shift around funding. It doesn't have the force of law in a variety of ways. And it can be, if the administration changes in the next election, which is less than a year away now, this could all go away then. So it is, by nature, a pretty limited kind of thing. But that said, it does, I think you have to see this as part of preparing the government to do more, right? So that when Congress is ready to act, for example, heads of departments have somebody on their team who's thinking about this, right? Reports have been written which will, because of this, reports will be written, which will turn into the seeds of future legislation, future regulation, right? So it's not going to impact your day-to-day now, but especially for those of you in larger companies in the audience who have lobbyists and things like that, those folks are going to be very busy responding and reacting to the fact finding that's going to be done as a result of this. And that's going to turn into real facts on the ground, presumably in the next administration.
And that before I hand it over, I think that was my point, right? Is that it's not really an enforceable action right now. And it's really more of a signal. And it is signaling to all levels of government, all levers of government, that you need to be thinking about this. But what does that mean? And are we headed towards an even more patchwork framework of regulations on AI development? And I think that that's going to be a real challenge for the industry moving forward.
Dee, I think you raise a good point, because we've seen that with the data privacy legislation process, right? Instead of having one overarching federal privacy regulation, now we're on pace to have 50 individual state level privacy laws. I did want to enforce something that, or reinforce something that Lewis said, in that we've seen cases where executive orders that ostensibly didn't have the rule of law, didn't have funding, became the law of the land, so to speak, because they weren't taken back, they weren't reversed, they weren't, nothing was done with them other than them becoming the precedent that was referenced for conduct on the part of the government. And so I agree with both of those perspectives, that this is a signal, this is an indication to corporate America that if this is important to the federal government, it had better be important to you as well, lest they step in and make it important to you. But I think that it would be short-sighted of us to say, listen, this is just an EO that's going to be read, it's going to make the news cycles, and it's going to be forgotten about by the time the election comes around. That there's danger in that perspective, I think.
Yeah,
But I do think what's happening in the Senate because of this and other places is interesting, right? It has kicked into the gears of the sausage making of laws that will be enforced by agencies.
And if I could offer a bit of a global perspective as well, as the only Brit on the panel, yesterday we saw a release of the guidelines for secure AI that was jointly done by the British, Australian, Israeli, so many different governments. And that one, I think, it had the exact same sentiment as what we saw in the. I agree with Diane, the relatively thin guidelines on security in the executive order, where it offered a little bit more direction and substance beneath it. So hopefully this is a continuation that we'll see, not just in the US legislation bodies, but also pushing out globally, because we all know, cybersecurity, AI, anything technology, it is global impact and global consequence.
That is a really good point, because that what you're mentioning, Josh, and I would encourage all the listeners and viewers and readers on the show notes to go look at that link there, because it does give really prescriptive guidance on how to build secure AI systems. And that is like a really great architectural primer.
So I want to back up just a second here. You mentioned something earlier, Dee, about this not having any teeth. And then that kind of spawned a whole conversation real quick. For people at home that might not have gotten through this yet, read the entire order yet, the entire executive order ends with a statement that this is not intended to and does not create any rights or benefits, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law, or inequity at any part against the United States, departments, agencies, entities, and so on and so forth. So they specifically say at the very end, like, this is a bunch of suggestions, a bunch of reactions, basically. And you're right, to go down and let's start researching this. Do you think that is the goal? And Brian, I'm going to kick it up to you because I haven't heard from you in a while. But is this all just to get us light a fire under us to, like, all right, now we got to go tackle this? Or is this spell out what future regulation you think will really look like once the states and once legislature actually gets around to it?
Interesting question. I think my personal perspective is that, I think before this order came in, there's probably a lot of academics in the panel who probably, because AI is an interesting space, unlike the traditional security, right? Because there is a lot of stuff inside AI still very much research, right? Still in academia. I mean, all the algorithms that are coming in, all the revolutions that you're seeing with large language models, transformers, everything, right? So I think that we are still early in the space, but what's really interesting is that this is here to stay. This is not just a shiny object trend, right? Especially, at the rate we are going, we are getting closer and closer to AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence, right? So there is definitely at the federal government and the state level, there is definitely an understanding that this something had to happen soon, right? So this is a reaction to that. Yes, it may not have teeth initially, but I think the individual agencies, the 3-letter agencies, and the states will eventually come up with. In fact, I've been in a couple of meetings with some California senators in terms of frameworks for this, right? And lots of states are coming up with different frameworks and models, right? And I think that there will be a lot of different forms of interpretation, even in the security world, right? There are certain either executive orders or even like government mandates that came in but then eventually the frameworks were put by the consulting companies and whomever. Like, so every company had their own framework until it all got standardized, right? The same philosophy is going to happen here as well over time, because the thing is that AI is growing at such a fast pace, which will result in, of course, the US government doing what it did. The agencies are going to put more purchasing mandates, and then states are going to come up with their stuff. There'll be a mess for a while, but it'll settle, right? And just like everything that happened in the security industry will take sort of the same evolution, and in fact it'll happen much faster, because this has to somewhat reflect to the growth of AI and the speed where things are coming around. We have like things like AGI and advanced large language models, and all these things are getting growing at such a fast pace. In the 1990s, the internet didn't grow this fast in terms of. I saw a graph of OpenAI growth versus every other company, Google's growth and Facebook's growth. It's just a hockey stick. So the regulation has to react to that fast. If government doesn't step up fast, or the agencies don't step up fast, I'm sure all these private sector will end up coming with their own set of rules, because there has to be enough there, right, in terms of frameworks.
So Josh, I'm curious from an international perspective, since we have you here, kind of the same question, but related to other things we've seen come out of the EU and the UK. Have we seen anything with teeth in it yet? Anything you're aware of that any panelist aware of that has teeth that people need to be reacting to right now?
Yeah. Maybe not specifically around AI, but I think that maybe that's where we're going. If you look at, from the EU perspective, GDPR was something that kind of came along and shocked the world, or certainly Europe, as to how broad this definition of personal identifiable information was, and the potential fines that could be in there. I know we're not got potential fines yet, but what was interesting then was how everyone kind of shaped up their act, when in reality, the only people who ended up being taken to the European courts were actually some of the largest players, your Metas of the world, who had irresponsibly stored the data. So I think we'll probably start to see things like that, where if we get some teeth will be delivered when they go after the kind of high profile AI companies, which everyone knows, who maybe aren't adhering to the best practices that are starting to be outlined, or heaven forbid we see some sort of actual compromise, when that will bring everyone into line. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but the best way to get people to buy into security is to experience that large scale breach. We're still not great at kind of getting ahead of that proactively, but hopefully this will let security teams have a bit more ammunition to say, we need to get on top of this now, because we can imagine that teeth are coming, even if they don't exist.
Yeah.
May I?
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, may I ask, do we need additional teeth in this specific space? Do we need more cudgels for the business world, right? The point I'm coming around to, I guess, is that AI is a force multiplier for existing processes, existing ways of operating, et cetera. That's what it's sold to the world, to the global populace as. And so I'm questioning in my mind, do we need anything more, or can we just lean into things like, as Josh mentioned, GDPR and other regulations that do have enforceable, punitive language in the regulation, that if AI steps out of bounds in those existing ways, we can leverage those for that process? It's an open question to anybody who wants to address that.
Yeah.
Mike, if I could jump in there, I think that's actually that's a sharp question. I'm a little worried that our existing mechanisms don't work very well, right? So, for example, the UK Post Office has been having this ongoing scandal for about 20 years now. So pre-AI, they built a software algorithm for auditing, and Josh can correct me if I'm getting some of the details here wrong. They built software to help audit essentially the finances of the UK Post Office. That software had bugs in it that cost a lot of people their jobs. They were falsely accused of defrauding the post office, including people who committed suicide, right? Because they had been threatened with jail for something that they didn't do. There was a bug in the software. And the UK Post Office stonewalled for about a decade. They didn't know for a decade, and then for another decade they knew but stonewalled, right? They said, no, our algorithms are fine. right? And again, this all predates AI. And so we really, I think as a society, we already struggle quite a bit with how do we govern the algorithms that are increasingly pervasive in our lives, right? There's similar horror stories about like, how you, there are several states that use algorithms to predict whether or not you might go back to jail. And guess what? They basically boil down to, did you grow up in a ghetto or not? Which is an extremely problematic way of determining whether or not you're going to go back to jail. And again, all predates AI.
That's part of the language is actually using it for predictive crime modeling. So it's interesting to bring that specific thing up. That's mentioned, I think, 3-4 different times. It's defined and then used later in.
The EU was about to pass an AI Act in February, that included specific regulations on what they deemed high-risk areas, which included criminal law, anything that had to do with employment, right? You can't hire or fire people based on AI. The problem was they almost had it passed, and then the European Parliament was like, what's a large language model? And so then they had to try to rewrite the whole thing. And this is where I have some sympathy, right? These governments are trying to act on the fly in the face of stuff that feels very important, that feels like it's being adopted very quickly. And they want to make sure that people aren't fired because of bad AI. But the state of how you would write that in January is very different from how you'd write that now.
But we are seeing it written out there already. And D, I think you can point to a couple specific state level things where this is being enforced or proposed enforcement. Why don't you let us know? I think New York and well, you know better than I do. You're on mute. You're on mute, Nate.
Sorry, if you look at the AI laws that went into effect for 2023 at the start of the year, right? You had California, Colorado, Connecticut, New York City, Virginia, Utah. Like the states are getting involved in this. But I think what's really interesting is that, courts are ultimately going to have the final say. And what I find really interesting about this whole debate is that it's often said that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. This feels a lot to me like the 1995 elements around encryption, and encryption being classified as a munition by the US government, right? And what you saw the courts ultimately rule was that code is speech and that it can't be regulated. And there's a whole lot of cases and precedent law here. And I'm not a lawyer, but Luis and others could say this. And what the courts have generally said is that code is speech. And that's what AI is. AI is code. It's going to be really hard to develop regulations that go and try to limit code and have that code under the protections of First Amendment, at least in the United States. So I think this is all going to take a lot of time to play out. And there's going to be a ton of litigation to try to solve some really interesting regulatory and constitutional questions about code. AI, is AI code? Yes, it is. I don't think any of us would debate that. So if code is speech, how are they going to go regulate this? I think it's going to be really, really difficult to figure out what is going to come down this pipe. But again, going back to your first question, Dwayne, which was, hey, what has happened? What you're seeing is that the states are doing it, and they're taking a degree. The degrees here are big. And I'd encourage people to go look at these, but they are here, and this is just the federal government throwing its hat into the ring in some way. And again, ultimately, the courts are going to be the arbiters of this, and this gets probably solved over the course of several decades.
So I'm curious we're talking about very broad, very wide sweeping. What does this mean for industry? What does this mean for states? What does this mean for countries? I always want to boil it back down, though. What does this mean for us on the ground, for security practitioners? And again, I'm going to pick on you, Mike, because, well, cybersecurity is in your title. So what are your thoughts on this?
What does it mean to the individual?
Yeah.
It's funny. Again, as a bit of a data privacy and personal privacy nut, one of my biggest questions, and it's been playing out in my head for a long time now, is that if AI is gobbling up all of our consumer data, not just contact information, but telemetry data and so on and so forth, and privacy legislation, a growing number of privacy laws give us a right to action to claw back that data. The conundrum in my head has been, right, and I'll try to frame it quickly, but clearly, if the AI model is able to just remove my information as a data subject, the information that is unique to me, if the AI model is able to just jettison that information out of itself, just throw it back out, was it important that it be there in the first place? Or does it represent a very serious and very fundamental catastrophic change to the model when we pull information back out? And so I think it's two opposing forces, two perpendicular forces, right? The force of personal privacy legislation versus the force of what goes into the AI model has to stay there because it's learning from it, and there's long-term ramifications if we take it back out. And I don't know how to grapple with that. I don't know how to grapple with it in my head, let alone at a legal perspective.
Yeah, Mike, I agree. I just to like, we're going to see a blender of cybersecurity, trust and safety, and privacy analysis that is going to bend all of us in weird ways, right? Because they all intersect in ways that I don't think we can fully wrap our heads around yet. It's not you. It's not just you.
I think we could talk for an entire other panel about AI and what is First Amendment rights and what is free speech and all that. But I am just curious to hear everyone's reactions on this. If you can keep it to just a couple sentences so we can move on to other things inside the EO itself. But Josh, what was your reaction to that thought?
See, it's a perspective I've not heard hugely talked about. It's something I'm definitely going to research after this and maybe hit up some of the attendees here for some more information.
Brian, do you have a couple words?
Yeah, absolutely. Like before that, on the previous legislation, California is also working on SB 294. It's a Senate bill on a framework. So that's also interesting, which is really interesting because that has a little bit more enforceable style, right? But going back to the current question in terms of, how it will all impact overall and what the cybersecurity teams need to do, right? I think there's going to be a lot of things. First of all, there is a big knowledge gap in this space. This is a fast evolving space. Even a lot of AI, scientists themselves don't know, the changes that's happening every day, right? So the whole idea of security experts understanding this is going to take a while. But at the same time, like you guys said, like the higher level frameworks of, data, analysis of privacy, what goes in, what goes out, following some existing best practice frameworks can give you a kind of a head start, right? I think there's a lot of stuff from the private sectors and experts in AI and startup companies have to rush in to kind of fill a lot of the gaps. This gap is going to be very large, even in cybersecurity. When I remember in the 2000 internet days, when some of these frameworks began to come, most companies didn't know how to implement them. So there has to be a whole series of knowledge gap that needs to be fixed. I think that's going to happen.
Sure, as things evolve, the questions get even fuzzier and broader. But Dee, I wanted to give you a last thought on First Amendment and personal privacy and personal expression here.
Sure. I think it's an interesting component from both the use of AI and the development of AI. Let's talk about the development of AI because the use is way more complicated, I think. But the development of AI is really, I think, it's going to be interesting because we saw this with Bernstein versus the United States in the 90s around encryption. I think that we are going to see something like that. And it's going to test this theory of is code as speech. And I think I think that is going to be the centerpiece in the coming years. I have my own personal views on it. I don't know that that's super relevant for this, but I would say watch this space. And I think that, like I said, history doesn't repeat, but it sure rhymes. And I can see this coming up in a number of spaces.
So we're getting toward the end here, and I want to give everybody a chance to say their last couple thoughts on this. But I did have one other question about the EO itself. So I read through this thing, and some numbers jumped out at me that kind of, I don't know where they got these numbers from. And I was just curious to just get a quick hot take from y'all. This originally was for computing power greater than 10 to the 26th integer or floating point operations. 10 to the 26, that's zettaflops, or computer power greater than 10 to the 23rd for use for biological sequence data. And having theoretical maximum computing capacity of 10 to the 20th integer. So we're talking petaflops. Are we going to dial this back down to like you and I with our models, or is this literally only intended for people with that kind of crazy computer power, like national laboratories and Google.
But this negates the whole way in which AI is developed, because they're talking about an element in the training of a model, right, for the flops of that model, whereas most development now is going to take a third-party source model. It's pre-trained. It's a pre-trained model component, and it almost doesn't matter, right? And to me, that gave the best indication that the people who were guiding the people writing this really were kind of AI charlatans in my mind.
Yeah. There was a lot of, as I mentioned previously, a lot of academics involved, and it was very much aimed towards AI labs, right? A lot of the training, like Dee said, it's pretty much that computing power is pretty much consumed by most AI labs, right? So they were afraid the model would get trained from scratch. That would create issues. But this whole process of fine tuning, you take an existing model and fine tune it to do bad things, is also equally there, which is one of the things that will affect more enterprises than a brand new trained model. A brand new trained model mostly for things like terrorism or other type of attacks, right? And like things like AGI type big AIs, right? But then the thing is that there could be a lot of enterprise security vulnerabilities in terms of AI, especially with smaller models that are fine tuned, and that part of the regulation doesn't cover that.
There is a lot to chew on here. There's a lot in this executive order. We could literally spend an entire series on this. But here we are at the last couple minutes of the time we have allotted. So I want to do a quick roundup. Give us your final thoughts. If you could keep it to less than 45 seconds, it'd be appreciated for timing wise. But we'll start with you, Mike, and we'll go counterclockwise around here. So Mike, Lewis, Josh, Dee, and then Brian to end it all.
Final thoughts. I'm encouraged to see a lot more language from this administration regarding consumer data privacy and trying to put some loose guardrails around AI. I'm reminded actually of HIPAA. HIPAA initially was really low on prescriptive language as well, and obviously continues to be, but now there's bolt-ons to it. So I think this is encouraging. I think this is a great step in the right direction. I am cautiously optimistic about the government being involved, and I say that with a sliver of sarcasm.
All right, Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, this is the opening of what's going to be a generationally long discussion, right? We've been doing open source for about 25 years now. We're just now getting to serious regulation of it. This is going to happen more quickly. But it's not going to take 25 years like it's done for open source, but it's going to take years and a lot of like says, like HIPAA, that evolved over a long time. So this is not, it's best to think of this as sort of the opening part of a dialogue rather than anything that's really happening to us today right now, unless you work for the federal government, in which case, yeah, you should probably get on it. You've got some deadlines.
All right, Josh.
Sure. I think impact is really important to consider when you're looking to legislate anything. What is the potential security impact that could be had by the compromise of AI? And for me, the top of my list there is some sort of supply chain compromise in which an AI, whether it's LLM or something else, is compromised and it's integrated into so many different businesses or people's daily lives that then that trusted delivery mechanism is used to pass on the compromise and multiply that massively. We've seen it before, not in AI, but in things like SolarWinds supply chain compromise. So I think what we need to look at is understand who are the companies that have the biggest impact, who are currently involved in not just critical infrastructure is called out here, but also how far do their AI tentacles spread into different organizations and nations, and then really start to regulate those with a much more stricter and prescriptive regulation, which hopefully we'll see after the sentiment, which I think is a good positive step in the right direction.
All right, Dee.
I think if there's one thing to leave the audience with, it's that you need to realize that you cannot manage, you cannot secure, and you cannot fix what you can't see. And so you need to start thinking about all of the assets and getting a list of those things, a bill of materials, an AI ML bill of materials, or ML bomb as we call it, to protect AI. Start there. So if you want to build a secure AI house and a safe AI house, start with a really great foundation of ML lineage.
Excellent. Brian, bring us on home. Give us the last just 3-4 sentences.
Yeah, I agree with all the all the speakers. Essentially, like, this is a great start, but I think, privacy, consumer privacy, and consumer security is critical. And I think as long as there is a little bit more teeth to protect some of those things, it will be good. But I think at the same time, not stifle innovation. So it's going to be very exciting. It's definitely a generational conversation, right? And enterprises have to think hard and learn and catch up quickly, right? So learn fast, learn as fast as possible. Get help from many others, right? There are enough people to help you around, right? And then, buckle up your seatbelts. It's going to be a wild ride.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks very much for being on this panel. I'm hosting, so I get to say one last word here. The best thing I heard about AI in the recent past was from Deloitte at AI Dev World, API World. And they said from stage, like, anybody that tells you they know what AI is going to look like a year from now is probably lying to you. It's just moving so fast. Developers are doing things and inventing as they go. So while this is all, I think, a great discussion, we didn't even get into bias. Like, I think bias should be its own panel for, let's get into how we build or fix bias without implementing bias into the system. But that's all a different matter. But I think this is an important read if you want to see what's coming in the future of AI. But I don't think this is something that's going to affect you and I tomorrow, unless you work for CISA or NIST or one of those.
There's a lot of them. Don't worry about forgetting.
There's a lot of acronyms.
Well, excellent. Dwayne, Brian, Dee, Mike, Lewis, and Josh, definitely appreciate your time. Wanted to come back in here at the end and wrap things up and give each of you a very quick opportunity for some self-promotion. So we'll go around the horn again, reverse order from what we just did. Dwayne, we'll start with you. Just really quick, where can people find you? What do you want to send them to after the show's over?
So I'm pretty prolific on the Get Guardian blog. That's a great place to start there. Get Guardian also has a YouTube channel. And the Security Repo podcast. My partner would kill me if I didn't shout that out to the world. The Security Repo podcast is a podcast where we talk about all elements of security, not just code security, but physical security. We have people breaking into banks and people that, they're the good guys. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, the Security Repo podcast and the Get Guardian blog where I'd send people.
Excellent. Brian, what about you?
You can visit www.iterate.ai and learn about what we do in security. Yeah.
Awesome. Dee.
Go to protectai.com and learn more about our free tools that you can use to secure your AI, and request a demo of AI Radar that allows you to get that machine learning bill of materials and create policies to build a safer AI-powered world.
Very nicely said. Mike.
I would encourage folks to go to Newspire, nuspire.com. Newspire also has a YouTube channel. There's a lot of content with my mug there. And then I'm also pretty prolific on LinkedIn, and I would welcome any connection requests.
Thank you. Lewis.
So if the SBOM part of this discussion made you excited, you should go to tidelift.com, where we talk a lot about open source security, and open source regulation increasingly on our blog. If you're interested in the intersection of open source and machine learning or AI, I have a small newsletter, openml.fyi, that I use to just mostly noodle on, like, what's that intersection of open and machine learning really mean? What's that going to look like in the future?
Excellent. And Josh, last but not least.
Great. So head to Fortra.com. It's probably the biggest security company that you might not have heard of yet. We're looking to unify loads of different security solutions across email security, managed services, data protection, more. And I think most crucially for this talk, offensive security as well. So penetration testing and adversary simulation, which if you are in AI, you're definitely going to have to start looking at that in the immediate future if you haven't already.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, one and all, for your time and expertise today. It was an informative and lively discussion, which I always love to see. If you came in late at any point, you want to rewatch this broadcast, we encourage you to go back and check it out on the LinkedIn or YouTube channels from Solutions Review. That'll be available to watch on demand whenever you'd like. But we also encourage you to stay tuned right here, because in just the next minute or so, we will be kicking off our second panel for information security, the positive and negative impact of generative AI on cybersecurity. Once again, my name is Jonathan Paula. Thank you for watching and listening. We hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.